I'm Andrew O'Hare, the executive editor of Salon. I'm here with Jake Tapper, who's going to be a familiar face to nearly everyone watching this. What you may not know is that Jake, who is has been a leading host and anchor on CNN for about 10 years. Is that right, Jake?
Yep.
And before that, ABC News and a variety of other places in the broadcast and cable universe. What you people may not know is that Jake was at one time the Washington correspondent for Salon.com, and I had to look that up. It's going back 20 years. I'm sorry to out you that way, but
yeah, it was some of the most enjoyable journalism experiences of my life, no question. I think it was from '99 through roughly 2003, off and on at the end there. And it was just such a great experience. I know you were there too, Andrew, and it was the .com boom, and also a time where the rest of the media had not caught up, right, and realized that like they needed to be posting online all the time.
Yeah.
So that we could scoop everybody just by posting when we were done with our stories instead of waiting until 6 a.m. the next day. And Salon in that period was, I mean, I'm sure it's fun now, but that was a really rare, joyous period. I mean, I don't want to compare it to anything because I have no idea, but like it must have been like what it was like to be at the Washington Post in the 70s or so, just a rare lightning in a bottle kind of moment.
I think it was an unusual time. I think you're right, and frankly, with everything that this little place has gone through, we're lucky to still be here 20 years later.
Yeah, it's great.
Somehow we have made it work, in quotation marks. But listen, we're here to talk to you today. We can certainly reminisce, but you have published a new novel, which is the third in a series. Do I have that right?
Yes, All the Demons Are Here. It's the third in the series about the Marder family, which is a family in D.C. The first book takes place during the McCarthy era. The second book takes place during the Rat Pack era. And this book takes place in 1977. And they are hopefully fun thrillers that are also historical fiction that in which my fictitious characters play with real life characters from that time, whether Joe McCarthy or Roy Cohn or John F. Kennedy or Frank Sinatra, too, in the most recent book, Evel Knievel.
That's an especially enjoyable part of it. And what I enjoyed in this book is the fact that you have people appearing as fictional characters who not merely are real people, but real people that you have met. Like Carl Bernstein.
Woodward and Bernstein are the main ones. It was fun having Woodward. So one of the main characters, the book is written by two characters, Ike and Lucy. Ike is an AWOL Marine, very demoralized and disappointed in the leadership of the U.S. He's gone AWOL and he's now working on the pit crew for Evel Knievel in Montana. His sister Lucy is an aspiring journalist in Washington, D.C., and her heroes are Woodward and Bernstein. This is 1977, so 3 years after Watergate. All the President's Men book has come out. All the President's Men movie has come out. The Final Days book has come out. And I know them a little because Washington's a small town and people come on cable news, and Carl Bernstein has worked at CNN at different times. I've worked with him, and it was fun to put them in the book in their peacocky 70s incarnation, where they really were just like the brightest stars in journalism. And they appear in the book twice. And I sent them copies of the book and said, I know you've been depicted many times by many bigger names than Jake Tapper, but I hope you enjoy. And they both seem to like it. They're the journalistic North Stars for Lucy. I mean, this is an era in journalism where like everybody wanted to be the next Woodward and Bernstein, because they had played a role in exposing the corruption of the Nixon administration. And that ended in his resignation, right, obviously. And that really showed the power of the press. We can talk about the direction of journalism since and the like. I mean, but the problem with Lucy is instead of pursuing that in journalism, she ends up getting, in this book, taken in by this Murdoch-esque family that is starting a Washington, D.C. tabloid. It's Max Lyon is the patriarch, and he's a very thinly disguised version of Rupert Murdoch. And they're pursuing, that newspaper, the Washington Sentinel's pursuing a much more tabloidy way of doing business, because in 1977, with the Son of Sam murders and the like,
Right.
that really was the beginning of the rise of tabloid journalism. And it's not just the New York Post and Fox. I mean, it's everywhere. It's at CNN. It's at Salon. It's things. The news business is different now than it was in 1977. Some of it maybe not so bad. I mean, tabloidy can also mean compelling, can also mean eye-catching. It doesn't have to be disparaging, but generally it's mostly negative.
Yeah. Our Washington columnist Brian Karam, who you probably
of course,
writes about this nearly every week, complaining about the direction. What interested me a lot about this book, and I agree with you, first of all, we should reassure the viewers and readers out there, yes, it is a fun, entertaining thrill ride, but I couldn't help but see themes in this book.
Sure.
And I couldn't help thinking that one of the things you're doing here is you're writing about the 70s, but you're also writing about now. That there's a bit of prehistory of what's going on now. Certainly about the media, with you have this Murdoch analog and the rise of alternative fact-based journalism, we might say,
and race baiting journalism.
Yeah. Absolutely, and also the political the germs of our political situation now. I'm not going to go there in this conversation, but somebody could try to decode this book as like, at last we can figure out what Jake Tapper really thinks about politics.
Well, I've written about, so in the first book, The Hellfire Club, I was writing that in like basically over the course of 10 years in my head and the like. But it takes place in 1953, 54, and it's in Joe McCarthy's Washington, D.C. And Joe McCarthy was a character in the book. And then between draft 1 and draft 2 of the book, I made Joe McCarthy a bigger character in the book because Donald Trump had been, I forget exactly in the editing process, but he'd either been running for president or he got the nomination or he became president. I forget exactly what. And there are obvious echoes of Joe McCarthy in Donald Trump, and it's not even theory. It's there's connective tissue.
Oh, yeah.
Joe McCarthy's protege was Roy Cohn, and Roy Cohn's protege was Donald Trump. These are just facts, and there are similar themes in how McCarthy got press attention. And like one of the things that's so stunning, I read this book. You'd actually really love it, Andrew. It's an old book by Jack Anderson about Joe McCarthy that was written in 1952, so 2 years before he was censured by the Senate. And it lays out how awful Joe McCarthy was, but also lays out how much the media just played along with it and didn't do their jobs. There's an entire chapter. At one point I tweeted some of the pictures of those pages and tweeted them out. I don't know if they still exist in the current X version of Twitter, but there were lessons that should have been learned in 1950 through 1954 that were not learned by the U.S. media, that continued throughout decades and decades, including in the current era, not just the Trump era, but preceding Trump. So yeah, but anyway, this is all just a very long way of saying it's important to learn from history, and then you can understand today much better. And I have Evel Knievel running for president in this book, which is something that happened briefly as a stunt in 1972 in real life, not as a serious campaign or anything. But I thought, well, what if Evel Knievel had done that? There are a lot of similarities with Donald Trump. And again, this doesn't have to be seen in a pejorative way.
Right.
They have an uncanny ability to get media attention. They have diehard fans. They have a real gift for showmanship. And it might not be the kind of thing that everyone likes, but Evel Knievel had a huge fan base, cover of Sports Illustrated, cover of Rolling Stone, et cetera. And obviously Donald Trump's popularity speaks for itself. So there are just themes in American pop culture and politics that are fun for me to play with.
Yeah, I think the penny dropped for me. There's a point maybe about a third of the way through where you have a description of the division in the country between people who think that Evel Knievel is, some sort of repulsive sideshow joke, and the people in another part of the country who think he's fantastic and follow his every word indeed. And I was like, okay, I think I get the reference here.
It's like the show Hee Haw too, right? I mean,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
it wasn't
yes.
everybody's cup of tea, but it was very popular for a long period of time.
Yeah, and so I felt like one of the themes of this book is that some of the things that we think are new, like in the Trump era or the George W. Bush era or whatever era, are not maybe as new as we want to pretend they are. That these are kind of enduring themes in American culture and American politics.
Which I think in some ways can be reassuring. In some ways it can be disappointing, but in some ways it can be reassuring. We've gotten through,
right,
you know, periods like this before. And, you know, where presidents, you know, started wars that were not necessary, and, you know, with hundreds of thousands of people dying needlessly, et cetera, et cetera. Which is not to say no one should worry about, you know, the autocratic trends we're seeing in American politics today, but we have been able to persevere, and, you know, we just have to keep up the good fight, those of us who believe in democracy.
It was pretty striking to me that you have quite early in the book discussion, a group of Republican senators talking about Richard Nixon. And of course, the famous Barry Goldwater anecdote, which anybody who knows the tail end of the Watergate saga has heard many times, is mentioned very quickly. And I suppose the question that comes up is, you know, we didn't see anything like that happening in public with the most recent president. I mean, Senator Romney, we all know that he's been outspoken, but he's been a pretty lonely voice out there. Like, is it your impression that those kinds of conversations still happen when the doors are closed?
I think so. We've also, I mean, just to give credit to some people, there have been Republicans who have been more outspoken on the subject of democracy, or the subject of, you know, telling the truth in opposition to Donald Trump, who have, you know, who held elective office. A lot of them lost elective office, right? Or didn't run for re-election. Senator Bob Corker didn't run for re-election. Senator Jeff Flake is the current ambassador to Turkey, but he didn't run for re-election. Liz Cheney gave up her job, whatever people think of her politics other than on this issue. She knew that she was basically ending her political career, at least in the short term,
Sure.
by being on the January 6th committee. Adam Kinzinger, who's now a colleague here at CNN, he basically knew that he was not going to be able to win against a more Trumpy person in a Republican district that the Democrats redistricted him into. So there are a few, I think there are conversations. I mean, there is not, if you look at the House and the Senate, well, especially the Senate, there is not a run to endorse Donald Trump among Republican colleagues, although you would think a former president would merit such deference. There isn't.
Right.
I'm trying to think even, I mean, I'm sure Tuberville has, but like there isn't really like a groundswell of Republicans who have endorsed him. A lot of them are just staying out of it. And yeah, I think a lot of Republicans in the House and Senate, and probably the governor's offices too, would prefer that he just go play golf and retire and, you know, accept his place in history and the good things he did in their view, and move on. And I think they'd much rather not have to deal with. I think Joe Biden is pretty vulnerable. Just polls indicate that he is.
Sure.
And I think that there is a wisdom that it's possible that the only Republican who can lose to Joe Biden is Donald Trump.
And instead of that, of course, they and the rest of us have to go through, literally and metaphorically, you know, the trial of the next year or so, which is going to be unbelievable. I mean, it's
literally and metaphorically the trial.
Yes, yes, exactly. I know it's a dumb cliche to say that this is an unprecedented situation. People say that sometimes when it isn't true. This really is an unprecedented situation.
And something I was reminded of on social media, and I do read social media and constructive criticism, and I do absorb it. And one of the things that somebody said when I referred to an unprecedented prosecution of Donald Trump, somebody said, "Don't forget that the actions he took were unprecedented. That's the reason for the unprecedented prosecution." And so I always, you know, make sure that my writers, when we're preparing the scripts for the day, you know, it's not just an unprecedented prosecution. It's unprecedented actions taken by Donald Trump that led to these unprecedented, because nobody has ever refused to leave office or tried to incite violence to have the election overturned. It's just, yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Like, and as somebody who also dabbles in fiction, let me just also say, like, I couldn't have written any of this.
Right. No, no one could. Yeah.
Because it would be perceived as too broad. That would never happen. Nobody would.
Yeah.
That's not true. That could now. I mean, I feel bad for. I mean, there's a writer's strike right now, so maybe they're rebooting. But I feel bad for people who have to write, political fiction today for like for TV shows or whatever. Because go back and watch Veep, and like 80% of the stuff that seemed wild back then has already happened.
It always freaks me out when I see reruns of that show because there is a guy who looks exactly like Stephen Miller, right?
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. One of her most toady-ish aides has exactly the like lean hawk-like bald head look of.
I'm trying to think who that is. All I know is like literally Jonah when he runs for House. I think he runs for House. Is running an anti-vaccine campaign. It is long before COVID. This is about like childhood vaccines, and it's just
it's nuts the number of things that they predicted there. I also appreciate it. I think I bet that in a secret way this was dear to your heart. There's a sort of a tribute in this book to the vanished moderate Republicans of the Northeast.
Well, Charlie, my main character, Charlie Marder, who is the star of the first two books, and a co-star in this last one, because his kids are the stars. And I did that for a number of reasons. One, it's more fun to write for characters who are in their 20s because they'll screw up a lot more easily and credibly than people in their 60s. And two, I don't know. I just wanted to try something new. But Charlie Marder is, the book series starts in 1954, and he's an Eisenhower Republican. He's a World War II hero. Eisenhower was his general. He, his governor is Tom Dewey. He's a Rockefeller Republican. There's a whole strain of moderate Republicans that there are 3 or 4 of them out there, like, Congressman Lawler in New York and a few others here and there, but there are not a lot of them left. That's true.
Yeah, I feel like it is. And I was trying to figure out if I could place him exactly. He's not, I think I'm right that he's not exactly based on anyone real. I was thinking,
he's like a mix of, Senator John F. Kennedy, Senator John McCain, Jack Kemp, some of the war heroes that have served in Congress. But no, he's entirely fictitious. He's kind of just, and he's an alcoholic also because he self-medicates because of his PTSD, which they didn't even have a name for after World War II. But no, he's just I just try to make him a flawed but sympathetic character who one can project. Well, I think he believes all the right things.
Well, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, guys, because you're a few years younger than me. I'm old enough to remember Lowell Weicker, a Connecticut Republican, being defeated by a Democrat who ran on his right, a gentleman named Joe Lieberman. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that was a different era.
Yeah, definitely a different era. Well, I mean, the only political views that I've had Charlie espouse are opposition to Nixon. Because he thinks Nixon's duplicitous because he's known Nixon since the 50s. Opposition to the Vietnam War because he's skeptical of the generals. And the truth is a lot of people who have served, and I'm thinking of Chuck Hagel and John Kerry specifically, are sometimes some of the most skeptical of the urgency with which generals want to send men and women into harm's way.
Yes.
And then pro-civil rights. So, I mean, that's basically his 3 positions. Which would be, although, he's not a fan of the Kennedys because he thinks they're shady, which is, what Republicans thought of the Kennedys back then. So, but I mean, I don't really have any sort of like platform that he stands for beyond that. I just figure like, okay, these are things that a moderate Republican would think that I think won't alienate the viewer or reader rather.
Right. Right. There must have been so much, you can tell that this is a book written by a journalist in one sense, that a lot of research went into this to get the details and the chronology right. Obviously, certain things you're just making up, Evel Knievel running for president in a different period with a different outcome. But you did have to get things right about, was this news about Patty Hearst on the front page while Star Wars was in the theater, right? You didn't want to get that wrong because you'd get a whole bunch of emails from people, right? So
it's true. And even then, even with how diligent I try to be about this stuff, and I really do work hard. There's an amazing website, I'm sure you know about it, Andrew, but for anybody watching right now, called newspapers.com. It's a pay site, but you can literally go and see newspapers from the actual, not just the copy, like the actual cover of newspapers from the 1800s, let alone 1977. But yeah, I go back and make sure that, is it possible that this would happen at this time? Like there's some liberties taken here and there, like,
Sure.
An event that happens in June, I might have it happen in July, but like generally speaking, I try to adhere to the world of reality. Two things that astute readers have noted. One is there's a character in the novel who is a former governor of Idaho. He's invented. I made him up. His name is Lucky Strong. And I say that he's term limited out. Well, somebody writes in, Idaho does not have term limits for governors. Oh,
wow.
And then I know. And another one is I have Lucy reminiscing about playing under the Resolute desk in LBJ's White House in the Oval Office. And somebody pointed out LBJ had the Resolute desk removed during his presidency, and he used his desk from his Senate office.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
So for both of them, it's Ike and Lucy telling the story, so I can I don't feel a need to correct them. Well, Ike and Lucy got it wrong, not me. But then The other is just like, I love having readers who are smarter than me.
It's always what keeps us honest, right?
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that people felt, rightly or wrongly, about not just you, but you and CNN and the larger universe of cable news, broadcast news during the Trump years, was that there was a shift in tone or a process of adjustment. And I don't know whether that's completely fair, because I do have some understanding of what the pressures are like for what you have to do sitting behind that desk every day and not being overtly partisan, which I don't have to worry about, and not being and at least appearing not to take sides all the time. Did you experience that as a tonal shift? And was there a Rubicon moment, or is that an interpretation that's just not true?
I mean, I think that it is true that Donald Trump, who is a disruptor, who disrupts for positive or for negative, and there are positive examples of it. For example, the Republican Party is no longer a knee-jerk military intervention is the right answer for every problem party, and that's a positive. But obviously there are some negatives as well. And I think one of the things he did is by making facts and truth and basic decency partisan issues, he knocked a lot of people in the media kind of like off their equilibrium. I think that's obvious. A good example, a notable example, is how much he knocked Fox News off its equilibrium, to the point that they just paid a $787.5 million settlement to Dominion Voting Systems because they felt the need to adjust to be pro-lie so much. They broadcast these election lies to the point that they settled for that astronomical sum, and there will be more payments that they have to make as well.
Yeah, there will.
But on the non-Fox side of things, I think it's true that people, and I'm not holding myself out as an exemption from this, that sometimes it was difficult to get your bearing as to what to report and how to report it. And there are some philosophies that if everything's a crisis, then nothing's a crisis. And I mean, then I did try to adhere to that, because there were a lot of people who, sometimes his tweets were so outrageous that that folks would lose sight of stories that were of much more importance and consequence to individual Americans, having to do with the economy or immigration or whatever. So, I mean, that's a long answer in which is to say that, I'm not holding myself up as an example of perfection during any era. We try to do the best we can. I try to do the best I can in bringing the news in a way that is fair and the best first draft of history that we can provide, while also taking a position only on two issues in particular, which is lies and decency. And by decency, I mean, if you tell four members of Congress, women who are of color, that they should go back to the countries where they came from,
which they did not come
from the United States,
yeah,
that's abjectly racist. And if Joe Biden had done that, I would call it out, and Donald Trump did it, and we called it out. But by the same token, it was such a fire hose of stuff coming at you that I don't think it was always easy to figure out the context and the importance of every single story.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, I think that's a reasonable answer. I believe it's still true that you hosted what was and I think still is the biggest, in terms of numbers, in terms of viewers, the biggest event in CNN's history, which was the 2015, one of the very first debates, the debate from Simi Valley.
Yeah, from Simi Valley, the Reagan Library. Yeah, 11. We had an undercard debate of the people who didn't make the main stage, 4 people, and then we had the main event, 11 candidates, which I do not recommend. But yes, I moderated that. Yeah.
And did you, when that evening wound down, did you have a feeling at all that something different was happening in that election cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't when it was over. It was like in the first 5 minutes, because one of the very first questions I asked, and this I'm going by memory, so forgive me if I get this wrong, but I think it's the first question, if not one of the first. I mean, we probably did some cutesy, what would your Secret Service code name be? Maybe we did that at the end. I don't even remember. But there's usually some sort of soft landing attempted. So maybe that was at the end. But in any case, I think after opening statements, I believe I quoted Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, a Republican who'd been on the undercard debate, who had said that he would not be comfortable with Donald Trump's hands on the nuclear codes. And I think I asked Carly Fiorina if she agreed, and she punted. And then Donald Trump got to respond, and he just started attacking people on the stage. Like, why is Rand Paul even here? And then I asked the same question to Jeb Bush. Again, I might have the order of this wrong, and he did the same thing. Both Fiorina and Bush said, well, that's for the American people to decide. Both of them said that. Yeah. And I remember thinking very vividly that moment, oh boy, they have no idea. They have no idea what they're dealing with here. And this is the Tasmanian devil, Donald Trump, in terms of the energy and the uniqueness and the just nobody had ever seen anything like it before. He was already number one in the polls.
Right.
And they thought that, it seemed like every one of them thought that somebody else would take him out, and then they would rise, as happened with John Kerry in Iowa in 2004. Gephardt took out Howard Dean, and then Kerry became, the nominee, and ultimately. But that it wasn't like that. There was just, you had to respond to him and make a more compelling case, because he was capturing something in the air that was just very anti-establishment. There are other things in it too. Obviously, there's a degree of nativism and nationalism. There's some racism. There's a whole bunch of stuff swirling in there. But generally speaking, it was a whole, he was such a phenomenon, and they weren't providing an alternative.
Yeah.
In any way. They weren't providing an alternate case. And I was just like, they don't know what they're doing.
I can't help thinking that they couldn't compete with the performance, and that's still a problem for everybody who tries to go against Trump.
Yeah, I mean, performatively, there is no one else like that other than maybe Chris Christie.
Right.
In terms of just charisma and quickness and agility in these forums. There's a line in the All the Demons Are Here, where Ike is talking about Evel Knievel running for president, and he says something along the lines of all the qualities that enable somebody to be a great presidential candidate are the exact opposite ones that make them a good president, because of the because of pandering, and because of lying and the showmanship and the insincerity and all that stuff that's just part of being a candidate. but yeah, I mean, he has it, which is why, by the way, like, I think it's wrong for Democrats to discount the idea that if Donald Trump gets the nomination, which he could very well get, that he will be easily dispensed of by Joe Biden, who is not, never has been half the campaigner. I mean, even when he was like 40 or 50, half the campaigner, half the agility, half the energy. And that was him like 30 years ago, when I started covering. I remember interviewing him in one of the first pieces I did for Salon in like 99 or 2000, when he became chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And yeah, I mean, back then people had their thoughts about him and their opinions about him, but he was a lot quicker. He was a gaffe machine, but he was a lot quicker. He's obviously not who he was, 23 years ago. I mean, neither am I, but I'm also not president.
Yeah. I am being told that I need to let you go, but before I do that, tell us about the Parent Hollywood adaptation of, I think, at least the first book. Now, of course, it's probably not happening exactly right now because of the situation.
We're on break, but with strike. So it's this book, the second book in the series, The Devil May Dance. So this is the one. Charlie and Margaret get blackmailed by Attorney General Robert Kennedy to go out and figure out if Frank Sinatra is actually mobbed up or if it's just an act. And this is based on a very true story where Sinatra, who had helped JFK get elected, wanted President Kennedy to stay with him when he came out to California in 1962. And Attorney General Robert Kennedy, stopped it. And because there was concern in the FBI that, like, how could we be going after the mob while your brother's hanging out with Sinatra, who is literally friends with mobsters? So it's based on that. And JFK did not go. This won't spoil the book. But Sinatra goes crazy, and he had all this stuff built up in his Rancho Mirage compound near Palm Springs, a helipad and extra rooms for reporters and phone wires and all that. And he got a sledgehammer and he demolished it and all this stuff. And that's all real. So I just took that real story and I put a mystery around it and had Charlie and Margaret go out, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah. So Christian Slater is going to play Charlie.
Fantastic.
And we have a major showrunner and a major streamer, but I've been told to not mention it publicly because of the writer's strike. So I'm sorry. But when it's announced, I'm happy to talk to Salon.com, you or whoever about it. I have to abide by my Hollywood masters. But it was all like getting ready to go for the big pitch, and the writer's strike happened. So, but everybody's still in it, and hopefully the big mockers out in Hollywood will realize that the writers are not going to fold anytime soon, and they have the actors on board, and it's time for some fairness when it comes to these big deals.
Oh, good for you for saying that. Jake, thanks so much for joining us for so long. It's a very enjoyable conversation. And
it's great to see you, Andrew. You look the exact same as you did in 2000. Honestly, you really do. You have not aged.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. You look very good yourself. All the demons are here, right? That's the new book.
That's it. Yeah, okay. All the demons are here. Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for watching and for reading Salon.com. Independent journalism needs support, and you should definitely be supporting their journalism if you like it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Take care.